Hi, and welcome to Nation State of Play. I'm your host, Brian Miller. In each episode of this podcast, we explore high-impact topics determining the future of our nation state. Our guest today is former State Senator Martha Escutia. She's now the head of government relations at the University of Southern California and the vice chair of the California Emerging Technology Fund, where she's working to make high-speed internet available to all Californians. As COVID has made remote schooling and telehealth critical aspects of life, providing broadband access to every Californian is more important than ever. I hope you'll listen to this important conversation about what California can do now to close the digital divide. Well, Senator, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me here.
Great. Well, could you tell us a little bit about the California Emerging Technology Fund and what you focus on there?
Okay, the California Emerging Technology Fund was founded in 2006 pursuant to a merger between Pacific Bell and AT&T. And basically the merger, that the PUC imposed the merger as well as conditions on the merger, and that was to have a community fund capitalized to the tune of $60 million. A community fund devoted to the issue of bridging the digital divide. So we've been at this since 2006.
Great. So you really focus on advocacy throughout the state, education on the scope of these issues, but you're real advocates before Sacramento too, isn't that right?
That's correct. And we also work a lot with nonprofits and community-based organizations, because if anyone's going to be involved, say in telehealth, it's going to be the local community health clinic. If anyone's going to be involved in helping us, lay down some broadband, that requires not only advocacy with the ISPs, because you have to make, investments, but it also requires advocacy with community groups so that they can see the benefit of having access to broadband.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about the scope of the digital divide in California. I was really surprised to read some of these stats about just how widespread the lack of broadband access is. So yeah, could you kind of put this in context for us?
Well, the CETF did a survey in 2019, and we found that there has been some improvement in the sense that about 88% of the state's households now have access to high-speed internet, but we still have 12% of the households, that's basically 1 in 8 homes, that do not have access to the internet. And then the data gets kind of more depressing when you go county by county. With Los Angeles County, my home county, 16% of our residents in LA County are unconnected, but also in San Francisco, 12% are unconnected, as well as the Inland Empire. We have 9% unconnected, and in the Central Valley, also 9% unconnected. So there are pockets of what I would call high urban areas, maybe defined by poverty, as well as rural areas that still have high levels of households not connected to the internet.
So those numbers are interesting because you have a higher percentage not connected in San Francisco than you do in some rural areas, and that surprises me, of course. But I suppose that's more a reflection of is it really becoming less of a technology issue at this point and just more of a pure economic access issue?
It's really economic access, because even if people have access to a computer device, a tablet, or even a cell phone, many households still cannot afford the monthly fee to have access to the internet. And many times these low-cost offers that the internet providers offer, many times those offers are very limited in scope as well as limited in time.
Understood. So yeah, we've gone from a time where actually connecting physically the broadband was the big obstacle. That's not really the issue anymore. It sounds like
No. On the contrary, Brian, we still have to connect major broadband up and down the state, along the spine of the state, especially the Central Valley, in order to have access to those rural areas. And that's why, I have been a proponent of asking the High-Speed Rail Authority, for example, that as they're laying down the track for high-speed rail, or Caltrans and their rights of way, as you're dealing with your rights of way, lay down fiber optic, But before I can do that, I need to make sure that the ISPs want to do that type of investment. And that's where we have many times the problem that
Makes sense.
they don't want to invest. And then if they do invest, many times they do not offer low cost offers.
Makes sense. Well, I want to spend most of our time talking about what we can do about this and some of the really interesting policy solutions you've proposed. But before we get to that, could you just talk about some of the highlights of why this issue is so critical? You mentioned telehealth, and that's, of course, exceptionally relevant in the COVID world. But
Right.
what are the main arguments you use when you talk to legislators and policymakers about why this is so critical?
Well, one thing, if there is a silver lining to COVID, to the pandemic, is that it has really brought front and center the fact that we need to really take seriously the whole issue about being connected to the internet, not only for health purposes, telehealth, and by the way, telehealth is here to stay. It's going to happen. It's here to stay. But it's also a good way to offer medical services to rural areas as well as urban medically underserved areas. So telehealth is a very good way of providing key health services, and we need internet access for that. Second of all, when I read in the headline in the LA Times that 25% of LAUSD students had not checked online, that really bothered me tremendously. It basically exacerbates the academic gap, the homework gap, and a lot of our kids are behind. They were behind already. They're going to be more behind now. And that's also as a result of having no access to the internet. It breaks my heart when I read in the paper that there are moms and dads who take their kids to the parking lot at McDonald's in order to do their homework there and have access to the internet from how it comes out of McDonald's. That shouldn't be happening in California. The
Yeah.
land of technology, that we should not be going to McDonald's to have access to the internet.
Yeah, that's a really vivid example, really disturbing. Okay, so one of the things that you've talked about, Senator, is extending the authorization for the California Public Utilities Commission to raise money on this issue. So how would that work?
It would work through the California Advanced Services Fund, which is a certain amount of money, a couple of cents that ratepayers pay, and is collected obviously in the telephone bills. And that money goes to the California Advanced Services Fund for the PUC to basically, award grants for groups that are doing digital divide issues, etc. The problem has been that that fund, that authority to collect that money is going to expire in about 2 years. And so I would think that now's the time to, first of all, reauthorize it and extend it for longer, but also target the money collected so that the money goes to either telehealth or online distance learning. Because those are the two main issues that are impacting our state right now, health and education, and how the internet and access to the internet impacts that. We hope it happens. The California Emerging Technology Fund had an Assembly member, Aguirre Curry, to introduce a bill in this very truncated legislative session to basically start pushing for a greater authorization, an authorization of the fund to go longer and to also target the money. At the very least, we're having the discussion, which is, it's a discussion to be had, and hopefully the legislature will take notice.
Well, it's great that you've got the bill started. It sounds like an impossible issue to argue against. I'm curious what the response has been to the bill. Is anyone expressing any sort of organized opposition to this?
Not yet, but we're expecting it from the ISPs. They don't want to collect the money. Who knows? There might be even some groups out there who don't want to pay the money. But I mean, it's a very small investment to basically do what's needed, which frankly, if we had that kind of money being collected by the PUC, we would be able to draw down federal funds. And the FCC is already giving out billions of dollars in funds for telehealth purposes. So why can't California be up there first in line to try to get an FCC grant that we get to match with the money raised through the Advanced Services Fund? I just wish that that we as community people as well as policymakers, first of all, identify this issue as really a top issue for California. And I'm not talking about just getting computers or Chromebooks and get a hotspot. That's a Band-Aid approach. We don't need hotspots. We actually need fiber being laid down the spine of California. We need a fiber network, and that requires a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. So I figure if the PUC can start raising the money, we can then go to the FCC and get more money. And trust me, just like Franklin Delano Roosevelt was able to electrify rural America, why can't California, do that electrification version in California? And why can't Governor Newsom and the legislature be the first ones in the country to have all their residents have access to the internet?
Certainly would be a great legacy for this governor and this legislature. It's interesting that you mentioned the ISP opposition. Let's talk about that. Is that just because they feel like to customers it feels like a bill increase that they're getting paid for, or what is
Yes.
their?
That's what they will always argue. They will always argue that the customers are going to get angry and they're going to drop our service because they view it as a bill increase. Frankly, I think the burden is on the ISPs to frankly explain to people what are all the fees that they charge, because they charge other fees besides for the California Advanced Services Fund. Why don't they tell people what is that money going to? People I think would be more than willing to pay 1 or 2 cents more for some of these fees, if they know that it's going to go into laying down broadband up and down the state of California, and their kids will be able to have greater access to the internet as opposed to going to McDonald's for the internet.
Absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned the transportations project issue, and that's a really interesting idea. We've seen a lot of these projects being accelerated in some ways during the shutdowns. What is it that Caltrans can do right now on this topic?
Well, I think it would first require leadership from all the policymakers as well as the governor to basically bring in my opinion, the ISPs and say, you know what, we have to start investing on the hard infrastructure needed in order to make this a reality. And that's basically those fiber optic cables. If we already have Caltrans digging around in their rights of way, if we already have the High-Speed Rail Authority, constructing, a high-speed rail line along the Central Valley, and why can't we say, as you're digging for that, lay down the fiber optic cable? But that requires, first of all, a will, a political will, and also the willingness to basically make that kind of investment. And many times, those investments are not made. And that's why many times you have a lot of communities that are not only not connected, but they're also underconnected, which basically means they have access to a very slow internet.
So is that something that Caltrans can do without legislative authority, or is that something that you think would require legislation?
I think it would require legislation, but more importantly, before that, it would require an agreement on the part of the ISPs that they're willing to make these type of investments. And I think the state can also be a partner with the ISPs in making those type of investments. If first of all, we collect more money for the Advanced Services Fund, and we also draw down on federal funds for this. And trust me, if we have a new administration, there's going to be a major infrastructure, public works kind of, bill package that will be in the trillions of dollars, and this is time for a new deal 2.0.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Might as well
do it, because our infrastructure now, according to a New Deal 2.0, is very different from what FDR had to deal with. But but the concept is still there, and when the U.S. comes together that way, we all benefit. And so therefore, but we need money. I mean, it's not like the feds are going to give us the money willy-nilly. I mean, states have to come up with their share of the funds too, and that's why I'm suggesting to extend the collection into the Advanced Services Fund and draw down the FCC dollars for it. It's not like there's no money out there. There is money out there, so that the state can play a role in this and being a partner, and the ISPs don't have to shoulder the entire risk on their own.
So I'm curious as to the response you get from tech companies besides the ISPs. I don't know that ISP is really a tech company anymore, but there has to be an economic incentive for the people who sell technology products to have deeper broadband access. So they would seem like logical partners in this. Have they been helpful in your cause?
Absolutely. They've been very, very helpful. And in fact, the technology companies like Cisco, for example, very critical player and stakeholder in our latest project of the CETF in San Jose, in which San Jose, as a local government, basically said, I have this amount of money. Cisco, will you join me as a partner? And can we provide, basically access to the internet in the city of San Jose at the schools? And it has become a very successful project at the schools. So tech companies love those type of projects, but ultimately tech companies don't make the hardcore investments in which what I'm talking about, which is we got to lay down that fiber optic cable across the state.
Got it. So let's talk about the California Department of Education. They're obviously in the spotlight with all of the teleeducation going on. What can they do to help on this issue?
Well, I think for sure, they could at the very least, talk to your school districts and find out, which ISP is offering low cost offers and for how long. And they should basically, send a note to all the parents. For that matter, the ISPs, should send, notes in their mailings to people, or maybe even utility companies, send a note that that you can have access to low cost, internet, call up Verizon at 1-800-Verizon. I think that's a very good way of reaching people by basically putting those type of little notifications in the mail. But for parents, I mean, that's a captive audience. A school district knows how to reach their parents. Right. At the very least, they should be able to notify them of special offers.
So let's talk about it from that ISP perspective. There's these low cost programs that they're supposed to provide. Are they made whole for offering those products, or is there an economic disincentive for them to not make it as widely available as possible?
Well, first of all, the low cost offers, like I said, many times are limited in scope as well as limited in time. I think there is an economic incentive. You're basically finding a new client. Mm-hmm. And if that new client gets a good service from you, more than likely they'll sign up for the regular service. But ultimately, I have always have said that this issue of digital divide, besides laying down the hard infrastructure in terms of fiber optic, it also becomes a question of the market. Of will the market come up with a price that's affordable, and that very much is supply and demand. But however, there's no reason why we can't have a low cost version of internet access. I myself did the first low cost auto insurance program for the state of California. I basically said the state has an interest in creating a market so that everybody can become insured. Granted, it's not going to be a policy with the bells and whistles, but at the very least, we will handle liability. I did that for auto insurance. I think maybe it's time for the state legislature to consider low cost access to low cost internet as truly a state problem that maybe we have to create the market by way of state legislation. And it's very hard to do. It's very hard to get involved as a policymaker in market forces. But if the policy issue is important enough, then I think we should do it as policymakers.
Yeah, and it just seems like it's coming to a head so completely with all these health issues, all these education issues. If we're essentially going to require students to learn from home, we're certainly going to have to provide them the Wi-Fi to do so. So it seems like the right time for that conversation.
The time is now, and I'm not going to waste the pandemic.
the ROM quote of never letting a good crisis go to waste, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So what haven't we covered that the state can do? We talked about a few ideas here. You've got one bill introduced already on the CPUC authorization. Do you plan to seek more extensive legislation maybe next year?
Well, it all depends what happens with this bill, but I would assume that yes, we either might introduce legislation next year. if not be supportive of other efforts. We have to see how the legislature is going to react to all this stuff, not only end of session, which is end of August, but I also don't have a sense as to what's going to happen in terms of legislation being introduced for next year, which is also a new legislative session. We'll have new legislators. Some of them will have retired. We have new senators, new assembly members. I would just hope that, whoever's listening to this podcast, that as we are dealing with trying to get out of the pandemic, that I hope that people realize that the digital divide has always been with us. With a pandemic or without a pandemic, there's always been a digital divide. And you know what? No matter how hard we try, there will always be a digital divide, because whereas we're now headed to 5.0, there are some people in rural areas who have dial-up. So, some people will still fall behind, and many times that might be a reflection of poverty, or it might be a reflection of just having no access to lines and cell towers nearby. So, I'm ready for that in terms of, there always being a digital divide. I just want to get rid of dial-up, for example, and at least get people to 3.0 or 4.0, or, rather than, let's start talking about 5G. I say, wait a minute, not everybody is even at a mid-level of access to the internet. So I think that this issue is one that will still be with us for many, many years. And I think it's frankly kind of sad that California, being the cradle of technology, has not taken a leadership role in this.
Yeah, it certainly is strange when you think about the birthplace of the internet and the tech capital of the universe to see stats like that lagging behind. Let me ask you a broader question about financing this. And we've got a ton of budget fights going on in Sacramento, as you know, right now. And you were in the middle of these fights for a long time. And I'm curious as to your perspective on what Sacramento should be doing to close the budget gaps, whether it's on this topic or the million other things that are on their plate. What's your sense of sort of where they are, and do you think they're headed in the right direction?
Oh my God, Brian, I'm not going to put myself in the shoes of legislators today. I mean, the deficit that they have, the budget hole that they have, is so astronomical that I never would have even imagined that when I first got there in 1992, when we thought that maybe a budget deficit of 10 billion was a lot. I don't know. I mean, obviously people will always say we have to come up with doing an oil severance tax to, gather revenues, or changing, I don't even want to say change Prop 13, just basically make sure that commercial property, when it's being traded or sold, that it's also subject to a fair market value assessment. And therefore that triggers taxation. Right now, it's not subject to that, to a fair market value assessment. So, I mean, there are ways of doing this, but I'll be honest with you, we've tried to do the oil severance tax before. It has been rejected soundly by the voters. On this whole issue about commercial property, it's not about amending Prop 13, but it's about basically closing the loopholes in Prop 13 so that commercial property owners really don't benefit from it. Because Prop 13 was aimed to help out senior citizens in their private homes. It was not aimed to help out owners of commercial property. So I'm hoping that at least on that issue, we might have a bit more luck in this coming year. But other than, I can't think of other ways of generating revenue short of that, and maybe even increasing taxes. But I know that we can't increase taxes when people are losing all their jobs. So it's just a horrific situation. And we just better hope that we get more money from the feds in order to basically, backfill the hole that we have right now. And it's going to take several years. We can't do this in 1 year. Well, we have to basically be in deficit spending for several years and accept that and learn to live with that. And I know many people don't like to live with a deficit, but it is what it is. We also cannot go out there and do a wholesale destruction of healthcare programs or educational programs, or even social services to our elderly. We just cannot do that in a wholesale one-shot deal.
Yeah, it's the most dangerous possible time to be cutting. It's the worst possible time to be raising taxes. That leads you to deficit spending, which supposedly we're not allowed to do, but as we see, the state finds creative ways to do it all the time.
Absolutely, and you know what? There's nothing wrong with deficit spending. First of all, we didn't get into this problem because of our misspending. On the contrary, California was doing quite well in terms of saving money for a rainy day. We were actually spending our money very wisely, and we had a roaring economy. Then the pandemic hit. That's no fault of anyone. That's literally an act of God. A force majeure is what the pandemic is. And so I would hope that the voters are patient with their policymakers and with their governor, and realize that the hand that has been dealt to them as they're playing this game of poker is not a good hand right now. And so therefore some decisions have to be made which are not very popular.
So to your point here about deficit spending really being a necessity and not something we should be at all ashamed to do, we had Jim Wunderman from the Bay Area Council on a few weeks ago, and he's been pushing this idea about an economic recovery bond that would work similar to the bond during the Schwarzenegger administration to sort of help deal with the deficit issues. I'm not actually sure if the timing, if you were in the legislature when that was going on, but is this something that you would consider to be one of the tools that the state should think about using right now?
Absolutely. Everything should be on the table that would generate funds. I mean, even I think Senator Hertzberg has an idea that would allow businesses to pay their taxes ahead of time. And if they pay their tax ahead of time, they would get, I think, a 10% discount. That brings in money to the Treasury like right now.
Right.
And that's what we need.
Yeah.
The problem is, I don't know how many businesses can pay their taxes right now ahead of time.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, and Senator Atkins has a similar bill. The idea of a broader-based economic recovery bond, to me, intuitively just makes a ton of sense, because this is a problem that we will get out of. We will have a vaccine. We will have herd immunity one day. It's not like a problem that you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's going to be a rough few years. And one of the things that I sort of like about the idea of a California bond is it's a way for Californians who can still afford to invest to bet on the recovery of the state. And we have a lot of things going for us, a lot of things that would lead you to think that that's actually a really good investment.
I mean, if they were to market that thing very nicely, you would have a lot of families buying those bonds for their babies.
Yeah, exactly.
It'd be a call to action, a way to bring in, the spirit of Californians, into the recovery of the state.
Yeah, like you mentioned, FDR.
Just like FDR. I mean, I really want to see a mini FDR moment here in California. Well, not mini. We're a very large state and a very large economy. But, what happens in California, as you all know, it's a bellwether state. What happens in California goes east. It flows east.
Yes.
So it's a darn good idea.
Yeah, Governor Newsom's been saying lately that California is the coming attraction for the rest of the country, and I think that's right. Senator, thank you for being here. Thank you for your years of service to the state, and thank you for all the work you're doing right now. If people want to find out more about your organization, where can they go?
They can go to the California Emerging Technology Fund, which is www.cetf and then UND, so it would be cetfund.org. You can just go online right now. There's plenty of information there on digital divide, and also plenty of information on the investments that we're making as an organization. And thank you for having us and for giving us the opportunity to deliver this message to your podcast.
Thank you. Our pleasure, and great to have a chance to speak with you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Nation State of Play. Our producers are Hannah Miller and Jacqueline Artiaga. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. For more information, click through the link on your podcast app to our homepage.